Hey everybody, welcome back. We're going to take a look at the Patriarch Stories part 2 this time. So this time mostly about the story of Joseph. So, like I said last time, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be getting into the second part of the story. So the patriarchs are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, but the end of Genesis is all stories about one of Jacob's sons, whose name is Joseph. So we're going to break that up into two sort of bigger headings. The first one is going to be just about Joseph's background, like who he is, what he does. And then after that, we're going to get the story of Joseph and his brothers in Egypt and how that all plays out. So, first of all, who is this Joseph guy? He's the final big character in the book of Exodus, book of Genesis. Sorry about that, which sets us up for the book of Exodus. So the person who is writing the book of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, the first 5 books of the Bible, are all the same person. It's all Moses. And so Moses gives us Genesis as sort of a prequel. It's sort of a preview of what he's going to be talking about that happened in his life. And so all of this information is sort of like setting. It's sort of like when you take a look at what the characters are going to be like, it gives us a sense of, okay, this is the world that we're working with. These are the people that we're working with. This is the situation that we're working with. So the situation is that God created a great world, a perfect world, and that mankind went and messed that up with sin, and then that God comes in and rescues mankind from its sins over and over again. And that's the story not only of Genesis and of Exodus, but really of all of humanity. And we're going to see that at play here in Joseph's story. So the first thing is the story of Joseph and his brothers. So Jacob has 12 sons. He has one daughter. And of those 12 sons, we're told that he favored one of them the most, and that's Joseph. He showed that he favored him the most because he gave him a multicolored coat, which was a big deal in that day because dyeing fabric was very expensive. And so to have a coat that had a lot of color to it was definitely a very pricey thing. It was a very elaborate, extravagant thing. And so not only do his brothers notice that their father kind of likes him the most, but in addition to that, he kind of rubs their faces into it. He has these dreams, and in these dreams, he shows things like 12 other or 11 other things that are bowing down to Joseph, and it's like, oh, you think that we're going to bow down to you? Oh, okay. And so there's all of this tension that's building up between Joseph and his brothers there. So that's the first part of Joseph's background, is Joseph is born into this big family, but there's a lot of tension between him and the rest of his family. So then after that, we get Joseph sold into slavery. So how this happens is that one day Joseph is sent out to the field to go and help his brothers, and they see him and they're like, "We're going to kill this guy," and they plan on killing him. They actually end up not killing him because of one of his older brothers, Reuben. But what they end up doing is they see a slave caravan off in the background, and they say, "Well, if we're not going to kill him, we can at least sell him as a slave." So they sell him as a slave. They cover it up by taking a goat and killing it, and taking the goat's blood and putting it all over that fancy coat of Joseph's, so that when they go back to Jacob, they say, "Oh, your son died. We're so sorry. We couldn't help it." And so Joseph then is sold into slavery. Eventually, he ends up in Egypt. So while he's in Egypt, he does a lot of things. There's a whole lot of stories there, but he finally ends up in prison. And he's in prison, and he's talking to two people, a baker and a cupbearer, and he starts having these dreams again. So Joseph has all of these dreams, and these are a lot of times the way that God works prophetically through Joseph. He gives him the ability to see dreams and to interpret dreams. And then Pharaoh himself has this dream about that there are skinny cows and fat cows, and Joseph is able to, through God's power, not on his own, but through God's power, is able to say, okay, I know what your dream means. I know that this dream is all about that there's going to be these 7 years that are going to be fat. They're going to be good years. They're going to be years that we're able to gather a lot of food. But then there's going to be 7 years that are lean, that are skinny, that we're not going to be able to gather a whole lot of food. And he does this all because the cupbearer remembers him being able to interpret dreams back when he's in prison. It calls him up out of prison. Well, because of that, all of a sudden Joseph goes from being a prisoner to being the basically sort of the vice president of Israel, or Egypt rather. And so Pharaoh is like the king of all of Egypt, and he establishes Joseph as his, the word is vizier, his second in command, the person who is in charge of doing all of his stuff. And so Joseph, all of a sudden, sort of overnight, becomes a very powerful and important figure. So from there, we've got Joseph's background. So Joseph comes from this place where he's had this sort of tension between his family. He's been sold into slavery. He ends up in Egypt, and now he's really powerful in Egypt. And so now what we're doing is we're going to talk about how he works with his brothers. And you might wonder, how does he even see his brothers? So we start off with Joseph and his brothers. They show up in Egypt, attempting to buy food, and you get this sort of moment of like, oh, that's Joseph, except they don't recognize him. So Joseph's brothers in Egypt, they haven't seen Joseph in quite a few years. They go to Egypt because Egypt has food, because Joseph's been able to predict through God's power that there's going to be a time where they're able to gather up that food and store it and then sell it off later to all of the other countries. And so Joseph's brother comes, they try to buy food, but he accuses them of being spies, which, this is sort of Joseph getting back at them, I think. And he accuses them of being spies, and he tests them. He tests them in a few different ways, but eventually he decides that the testing time is going to be over. And so finally what he does is he reveals himself. He's done testing his brothers, and he's ready to reveal who he is. He does so with tears in his eyes. He loves his brothers, even though they've done all of this horrible stuff to him. And he says, hey, I still love you. I'm still going to take care of you. It's okay. I forgive you. And he invites the brothers then to come and live with him in Egypt. Well, the brothers then get to go back, and they get to tell their father Jacob this, that their son is actually alive. We don't actually have what they say to Jacob, if they finally come clean or not. We're not entirely sure. But what we do know is that Jacob is overwhelmed with joy that he's able to see his son, who he thought was dead. So after Jacob moves to Egypt, eventually Jacob is a very old man, and he dies. And Joseph's brothers, they come to him. They're worried. They're like, oh man, maybe he was just waiting for Jacob to die, and now he's going to kill us. And so they go to Jacob, and they're kind of like, well, Jacob told us to deliver to you that you should forgive us. And Joseph he takes it in stride, and he says, God meant this for good, even if you meant it for evil. And there's an important point about forgiveness there, that what Joseph has done is forgiving, but he recognizes that what they did was, they meant it for evil, and yet Joseph goes, well, through the power of forgiveness, through me forgiving you, it actually can turn out into being a good thing. And so he forgives his brothers. He actually promises that he's not going to do any evil to them, and he's going to take care of them. And so that is the part 2. That gets us to the end of Genesis. And so as we're at the end of Genesis, the next thing that we're going to be taking a look at is we're going to be taking a look at the stories from Exodus and how those stories play out for us.